Hello, this is Daryl War, and welcome to the third podcast, To the Pit of Ultimate Dark Shadows. I hope you got curious about our fine housekeeper, Mrs. Johnson, from the last installment that I mentioned she would be in this one. And, oh my, I believe Mr. Lou Graham has something to tell us. Imagine, if you will, those lovely lost boys of ours, motorcycling along the sandy beach of Santa Cruz. Oh, oops. I mean Santa Carla. Perhaps with dreams in their minds of helping us rescue that sad little town. To all walks of life, I'd like to say, good evening, Collinsport! Anyone remember that film, The Lost Boys? That was the one that kept you coming back for the jokes as well as the drama and the horror. It was a blessed combination back then. I still dig the soundtrack, and I hope you do too. Now, onto our intro. I wanted to let you know a lot of the research I've done for this show has been for the 1960s. Certain obvious websites are good, but hey, there's nothing like being able to call your mom and ask her wild things like, how much was a cup of coffee back then? Or, when did you last get milk delivered to your door? Or, how many surf pictures came out in the 1960s? She told me sometimes there was nothing else to choose. Ah, what a salty ocean sport. Unfortunately, for a certain medication cream, I could find no clues available as to its history, and that being the case, I went with the generic term and skipped the product placement. So, Mrs. Johnson, quite the woman. Originally a housekeeper of Bill Malloy's, from stuff I haven't seen, and strangely a short-term spy for Burke Devlin. However, she came to love the Collins family, and so she continues in this capacity as a gal with quite the heart. This rendition of her has her chatting with a friend, and I am sure almost everyone will recognize this lady, that is Mrs. Johnson's friend, but I shan't give it away, of course. When I originally saw this idea percolate into my mind, I must say that it was devised from one of those Pit of Ultimate Darkness skits from Kids in the Hall. If anyone is familiar with those skits, there's one in which Mark McKinney is covered in red body makeup and leather with horns on his head. So as he declares his love for the Pit of Ultimate Darkness, he looks at his watch and he realizes, oh, there's another show on now. And for those of you who don't know or don't remember, I won't spoil the surprise. Okay, remember how I've previously stated what good encouragement can do? Well, I needed encouragement for this one, from someone who doesn't really like the show The Devil Was Drawn To. I told my fellow about it, my idea, described how it would pan out. His reaction was to either cough over some food or beverage, I can't remember which, and then he said, "That's terrible. Do it." There's also a bit of discrepancy in the timeline for my story because of where we found Victoria Winters in this episode. But you know that dame. She can do the time warp. Though how she's able to get a phone call to this place is up to you. At this point, I wasn't too worried about mixing dark shows and time periods, but after a while, I did try to stick to the 1960s. It just seemed more appropriate. You may ask, well, Wadsworth, from the movie Clue, a film made in the 1980s. Then again, it was based in the time period of 1954, I believe. Still, I like to think not that much time passed for our Wadsworth, and he's as spry as ever. Between his work at Hill House and his employment at the Old House, he's probably seen a great deal of darkness along his way. Now, for those who don't know the program Dark Shadows, we've skipped ahead again. Roger has married Cassandra, who is really Angelique. And not to put too fine a point on it, everyone pretty much knows she ain't there to help out or anything, except poor Roger. To reach Barnabas, in a way that will, wipe him out, she distills a dream curse into the mind of Maggie Evans, who resembles Josette. Gee, I wonder why. Ah, Angelique is still jealous of that girl, of course. Anyway, the dream curse develops so that each person who has it has to tell the next victim about the content of the dream. Then that person who heard it has a worse dream the next night. In this episode of Mine, Mrs. Johnson is the hero. You see, she has an old pet who somehow incarnated into a frightful fellow with his own dream curse. Ah, Mrs. Johnson. I find her past much less empty these days. Also, somewhere in there was the construction of Adam, Collinsport's version of the Frankenstein monster. Ouch. That guy, or perhaps guys, as the case may be, likely saw better days. I must admit the character of Adam really irked me, but I didn't want to leave him alone entirely. In fact, I think my rendition of how he turned out does him sweet justice, indeed. Yay! Adam was created by Dr. Lang. This doctor managed to cure Barnabas somehow by creating Adam, something about his life force or their combined life forces. There was some combination between Barnabas and Adam that made so little sense to me that I'm not sure I can really describe it. Dr. Lang also had an odd helper, Jeff Clark, who was seriously grossed out, understandably, at having to find body bits and dig up corpses to create this nearly 7-foot-tall combination of men. Good stuff does come out of Jeff, who keeps fighting the notion that he's someone Victoria Winters remembers from 1795. Dr. Lang never saw Adam come to life, of course, due to some voodoo from Angelique after her attempt to possess Roger to kill him, Dr. Lang. And that failed, of course. So she used the voodoo doll. Here, in my version of the story, it doesn't turn out so bad. Adam does still lock up Carolyn in a root cellar for days. If she ate anything down there or just wilted, I can't recall. Either way, when she manages to escape, and she almost plummets from Widow's Hill, Adam manages to get involved there and save her, so she does take some pity on him. Either way, my Adam doesn't come into contact with Sam Evans or Willie Loomis. I know the time placement is off here, but I also remember I wasn't using a lot of tools when I first started writing this thing. It was pretty much all from memory, so it surprises me that I even got it all this accurate. I didn't really change too much of it, and it's likely going to be the shortest episode. That being the case, I'd like to go into how deep I've gotten with my heavier concepts, just in case anybody's been unnerved or something like that with my intros. It does seem to be, as Sir Simon Milligan expresses, looking into the dark aspects of things, and later on looking at one's Jungian demons. I actually gave him that one. He didn't say it in the actual Kids in the Hall show. I'm not positive, but I do anticipate people having this idea that I'm trying to be preachy or something. But what I'm really trying to express is more in the lines of education, which I have done a lot of work in. In a previous intro, I mentioned how all this came about, and it's not intended to case on anyone. So all that stuff about my experiences putting this into text online, like I said, it was probably a good thing because I revised it, made it better, and really sat down to do these recordings. And also, like I said, the recordings are better because it's going to reach people's imagination more, at least a number of people. And so in that, it's more of looking at some of the problems we all face and giving out some guidelines that have actually helped me a great deal. So, like I said, I have had my own experiences with abuse and both getting and giving therapy. And I know from a lot of that experience that positive reinforcement works and constructive praise isn't really a sappy notion. In fact, I have a quotation to that effect. And this is the quotation. "We all deserve respite from evil, and it is this constant that is worth pursuing towards a permanent and enduring peace." And what icon of the stunning 1960s wrote it? Yep, Michael Nesmith, the monkey of the once famous wool hat. It's from his novel The Long Sandy Hair of Nephthys Mora, which sadly got some harsh reviews, but I was amazed at its content. He even makes some great pop culture references in the book when his character reaches a diner and looks at the serious oddities in the jukebox. I found an audio version available that he himself read, and I can't thank him enough. It was really a fun listen. And of course, knowing me, as I have this blend of, all kinds of combinations of things, I mean, that it does have that same edge to it. Also, looking back on my previous intro, particularly the first one, there was a lot of interesting details in the writing experience. So that is somewhat educational too for people. Looking at the word count compared to the time index of how long it would take was really wild. I mean, there was one episode I liked a lot, and then I saw that the word count was over 7,000. And I thought, oh, okay, that's why it took so long to do the reading. Gotta narrow that down. So that's made me really aware of what to do in script writing. I gather I'll learn more because with a radio drama, many of the words typed in are just character names. So it's hard to know how much time is there if character names are written, but their lines are short. So it's like you have, you're just saying, this person's name and maybe they just say yes, no, maybe it's that kind of thing, like very small sentences. So you have, you have to wonder like how many of these words are people's names and how many of these words are lines they're speaking. So I've narrowed down a cross blend of looking at both the page count and the word count. If that information helps anyone out, hey, more for the better, right? And I do know that it's funny, it really is, to try and use spooky shows for the purpose of, say, sweetness and light. But when you look at our list of bonus helpers in the mix of, not just Dark Shadows, you can see that all those other shows, especially the ones that strangely came out in the 1960s too, had loving hearts and happier problems to solve. So in this funny way, it works. Much of my life, I'd really wanted to write a story incorporating all these characters. The difficulty was, what would they all be doing together? Then, I metaphorically took that train to Collinsport. Okay, I realized, this place is seriously in need of help. And as many people of the Gothic variety know, from our experiences in the previous decades, we are and have been a rather misunderstood band of groovy ghoulies, haven't we? So, in all of those things, this presentation expresses that a lot. Now, ever wonder what happened to the stately Adam and where he disappeared to? Well, you're about to find out. Enjoy.